Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce today's presentation as part of the Dean's Innovative Leader Series. Today, in close collaboration with Spain at MIT, we welcome the former Prime Minister of Spain, José María Aznar. We are very fortunate to have the President here with us today to share his thoughts on leadership and relaunching growth in Europe and around the world, if we may. It is a wonderful honor to have President Aznar here at MIT on this day in particular, as today is the Spanish national holiday, Día de la Constitución, or Constitution Day. It's the anniversary of a referendum held in Spain on December 6, 1978. In this referendum, the people of Spain approved the new Constitution, an important step in Spain's transition to a constitutional monarchy and democracy. Before President Aznar took office as Prime Minister of Spain in 1996, his country was paralyzed economically by high unemployment, a deficit, and little growth. President Aznar instituted numerous economic reforms, including liberalizing the market, privatizing industry, and in turn, leading to the creation of 5 million new jobs and a budget surplus. In 1999, the European Union introduced the euro, a major success for President Aznar and his government. Steady economic growth and falling unemployment won the government public support and led to his re-election in 2000. And by 2001, Spain was one of the fastest-growing economies in the EU. During President Aznar's term in office, Spain's GNP increased by 68%, and Spain became the 8th largest economy in the world. In 2003, President Aznar announced that he would not seek a third term as president. Following his presidency, he was appointed Distinguished Scholar in the Practice of Global Leadership at Georgetown University in April 2004. In 2008, he was appointed to the Board of Directors of the News Corporation. He is also a member of the European Council on Tolerance and Reconciliation and the Global Leadership Foundation, an organization that works to promote good governance around the world. Earlier this year, he founded the Friends of Israel Initiative. Would you please give a very warm MIT Sloan welcome to President José María Aznar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sloan. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. Good morning, all of you. Thank you very much to MIT to invite me to participate in this event. Thank you very much to the MIT Law School, and I'm Dean of the School for the Hospitality. And I'm trying to explain some ideas about the economy in Europe from my view of the former politician. I can express some social ideas, how it's possible and how it's necessary to relaunch growth in the continent, in Europe. And we can then open a Q&A period for other questions. As you know very well, Europe is amidst one of the most serious crises of recent history. In part, it is so serious because it had remained concealed until recently. But now it is impossible to continue ignoring the economic and financial effects of the European crisis. But this crisis is one of the consequences of something deeper and greater. Acknowledging and acting upon the roots of what is causing social distress is what political leadership should now offer to European citizens. We don't live only an economic crisis, we live in as well a political, cultural, and social crisis. I would like to take some minutes to state what, in my opinion, is the true underlying crisis suffered by the European continent. In order to do this, I deem it necessary to adopt a broad historical perspective. In the aftermath of the Second World War, Europe established some solid bases upon which its security, freedom, and prosperity will be built. Those pillars were the Atlantic Alliance as a pillar of its security, democracy as the foundation of freedom in the European states, a shared welfare model as the expression of a broad social consensus, and the European Union as the materialization of the states' will for a peaceful cooperation in a free economy. The European Union project embodied the main idea that peace, freedom, and prosperity had to be simultaneously protected. Because the moment we sacrifice one, the other two will be bound to be lost in the end. Europe's World War experiences settled the conviction among European leaders that security, freedom, and prosperity were accomplishments stemming from society's effort to bear them and keep them. However, gaining ground today, we find those who see the world and act upon the mistaken belief that freedom, security, and progress are something like natural properties, perpetually guaranteed whatever we do. This is not so. It has never been so. The current crisis has bluntly shown that it is not enough not to do things wrong. It is necessary to do them right and to keep in doing them right. Those of us who think that the key issue is to reflect on the causes of freedom, security, and progress consider that they rely on our acts. They will not exist if societies do not protect them through the establishment of institutions that respond to a certain set of values and ideas. On the contrary, those who think the relevant issue is to reflect on the causes of poverty, war, and civil conflict do nothing to protect them and only look for someone to blame when their absence is all too obvious. The first way, in my view, of approaching the world and exercising political leadership is realistic and responsible. The second is utopian. The first one encourages civilization, freedom, science, culture, and enterprise. It improves living conditions. It trusts individuals and the social and economic relations freely established between them. The second, in my view, on the opposite hand, is the dismal result of relinquishing all previously said. The clash between two opposite views regarding the political, economic, and social world is becoming clearer and clearer every day in European societies. And I believe that the true origin of our European crisis lies here. In order to find a solution, a technocratic economic agenda will not suffice. A strong political leadership is also necessary to find a way of pushing forward reformist policies through distrustful societies. This is difficult because a cocktail of postmodernist illusions is rooted among us. And there are, in my view, three illusions. The illusion of progressivism. That is the illusion that societies will just continue improving thanks to some kind of guaranteed mechanical progress, without anyone doing anything. The illusion that social cohesion and their well-being can be preserved without any effort whatsoever. The illusion of do-goodism, that is, that there are no real threats to freedom other than those invented by governments themselves. And finally, the illusion of the eternal teenager. That is the idea that oneself is an endless source of economic rise, that the government has the obligation to fulfill in exchange for nothing and for an indefinite period of time. An illusion which is precisely the opposite of responsible fiscal behavior. An illusion that goes against a feasible and welfare model that could be supported by a broader consensus. A society, in my view, cannot last if it is founded on these illusions. This alliance of progressive do-gooders and eternal teenagers will never give way to united society, nor will it be capable of guaranteeing security, the exercise of freedom, or the real progress of individuals. It is difficult to trace back the moment that Europe started to lose the pillars the continental project rested upon. It is difficult to identify the moment when it started to replace them for that postmodern cocktail, truly explosive for the future of any country. The truth is that with the turn of the century, the European project confronts a true challenge. The end of the Cold War and the beginning of globalization made it necessary for Europe to renew and strengthen its foundational basis. Long-term political vision and leadership made it possible to start. The process of the economic and monetary union, supported by a credible and responsible stability and growth pact, an ambitious competitiveness agenda. The enlargement of the European Union to Central and Eastern European countries, and a renewed Atlantic alliance with a new strategic concept in the light of the tragic experience in the Balkans. These three crucial agreements should have enabled Europe to face with confidence and with moral and intellectual clarity the new era of globalization. They should have given Europe a clear role in the international arena based on its economic strength. They should have enabled it also to renew the key social consensuses around its social model, which is only possible if economic growth is ensured. It is true that Europe lacked intensity in its commitments, but those agreements were the ones Europe had to make. And the objectives of those commitments were to advance economically through competition, innovation, and budget balance, to make welfare sustainable, making reforms and updating it, changing the welfare state into a welfare society, to take on more responsibilities to protect our own security and the world's, and to favor democracy and freedom inside and outside the continent. However, these efforts suffered a heavy blow in 2003. Firstly, some European countries breached the Atlantic link, and thus breaching the Union itself. The pretension of turning Europe into a counterpower vis-à-vis the United States only brought suspicion, confusion, and internal division. Secondly, a pseudo-constitutional process was started. It paralyzed the European Union for years. The energies of Europe were diverted from the much-needed competitiveness agenda into the endless, inward-looking institutional discussions. More political focus on the competitiveness issue would have allowed Europeans to prosper in the globalized, knowledge-based economy. The original Stability and Growth Pact was abandoned. The pact conferred meaning and made possible a single currency, which promote and demand economic stability in all of its members. As such, the euro project was much more than merely 300 million of Europeans sharing the same currency. It was 300 million of Europeans sharing a common currency that promote and demand an economic stability that would enable a higher long-term growth perspective. When this pact was put aside, the seed of excessive public spending was planted. Now, it has flourished across the continent and has become unbearable. The lack of political will to fulfill all these agreements led to the responsible decision of ignoring them instead. From that moment, Europe has become weaker. It has become weaker because a Europe that put problems in the Atlantic link is a weaker Europe. A Europe that does not support itself on the strength of its states is a weaker Europe. An in-debt Europe is a weaker Europe, and a Europe with an unsustainable welfare model because its economy is not growing and its population is getting unbalanced is a weaker Europe. Well, much political leadership is needed to get Europe back on the right track. Reforming the Stability and Growth Pact must serve to reestablish the solid pillars necessary for economic growth, which is the necessary condition for keeping welfare. The new Stability Pact must be complied by all, in all circumstances, to avoid any country becoming a threat to the rest of the European Union members. To accomplish this, economic governance in the UE should be fit with coercive measures, including sanctions of a political nature. It is essential that commitments arising from the Stability Pact get translated into firm national political agreements. The euro has made all European economies so interconnected that these national agreements will reflect the political will of all and each. All and each European countries to stand firm on their previous commitment and responsibility to each other. We must acknowledge that the solution to the current euro crisis will ultimately have a political nature. The fiscal crisis of many European states finds its source in the lack of political will to enforce agreement which are fully in effect and perfectly legitimate. It is necessary that national political leaders undertake the task of explaining their citizens why it is essential to make structural reforms and ensure sustainability in the public finances in the short, medium, and long term. Trying to convince people that budget consolidation is just a temporary thing and that once the crisis is over, things will return back to how they were before is a huge mistake. That return is impossible because the road of irresponsible indebtedness has been finally excluded from the roadmap. And because the option of raising taxes indiscriminately will make it impossible to improve competition in the globalized economy and would condemn Europeans to massive unemployment and to stagnation. Giving European firms and workers the right environment and the appropriate tools to compete successfully in the globalized, knowledge-based economy also requires an ambitious competitiveness agenda with a clear focus on excellent education and training. The need of reforms and modernization urgently demanded by the European welfare model should be the opportunity for freedom to become again a core value in our societies. The welfare state must pave the way for a new booming welfare society open to all, where individual responsibility, opportunity creation, and social mobility will have a preponderant role. Society has to be given back the space it owns. The withdrawal of the state for certain social areas is inevitable as a result of the excesses which caused the crisis. This public retrenchment will be less traumatic if we address the indispensable reforms that we make possible that a women welfare society fill the space left by the state. I honestly believe that right now, political intervention in the economy has trespassed all reasonable limits and has invaded areas which should not be under its scope. And I think consensuses around the European social model are damaged by this. I am perfectly aware that all these are not easy tasks. They demand a clear vision on the future and political determination. Patriotism now means hard work, choosing the apparently difficult road and leading societies through that way so that their welfare is kept safe. I am confident European societies, and especially, let me say, in my country, in the Spanish society, will find their way to perform the much-needed pending reforms. No doubt that we will require a new responsible leadership, a strong and committed leadership to move the society away and to achieve these new goals from responsibility and prosperity for the country. Spain was not so long ago an example of reformist country, constantly working to provide its citizens a better platform on which to succeed in the global economy. Not so long ago, though now it may look like a different era, my country was able to grow strong amidst an international economic downturn. All this happened amidst the now dot-com crisis in 2001 and 2002. But I am sure that the Spanish society will be able to catch again the train to prosperity and self-confidence. I am confident that with new policies, with the reformist capacity of the nations, become again a stability pillar for the whole European project. Finally, let me say that it's necessary for Europe to develop a culture of security, a culture that allows Europeans to be aware of the proliferation of real threats against our freedom and our way of life. For too long, we Europeans have been able to ignore a large part of the threats because we had American protection on our side. Now, threats have become much more complex, and the option of a free security no longer exists for anybody. All categories to understand the world are no longer useful. In short, it is necessary that Europe takes as its most serious task to strengthen the three basic pillars upon which liberty, prosperity, and security rest. The same as 50 years ago, the goal is to seek a way of simultaneously protecting our freedoms, of acquiring competitiveness to generate employment and real progress in an increasingly open and demanding global economy, of renovating and strengthening the European welfare model, and finally, of taking care of our security in a responsible, predictable way. I believe that only when our crisis is viewed from this broad and deep stance, it is possible to understand that the way out of it demands vision and high doses of leadership. The solution we are seeking is not only for the economy, it is for society as a whole. We are seeking for a solution to a social and cultural problem of a continental scope, and the answer necessarily will have to have the same extent. But finally, times of crisis are as well times for opportunities. Thank you very much for your attention and your presence.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for coming. My name is Jason Tama from the United States. I wanted to ask you about security and the role of Europe. In 2003, You supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq to go after weapons of mass destruction. What do you feel is the appropriate European response to the current situation in Iran and North Korea? Thank you very much.
Well, I believe that at the time, 2003 and 2000, I believe that the world is better without Saddam Hussein, without Taliban, and without Milosevic. It's not an easy task to decide change of regime or to take some decisions. In the current world, the question is not a military priority, for the United States, or the exercise of leadership for the United States and even for its allies is the complexity of political situation in the world in this moment. If you look in the world today, in comparison with the world before and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have several differences. When the existence of the Soviet Union, there are two powers. And there is one alternative to our liberal system of democracy of freedom. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, there appeared only one superpower in the world. This is the United States. But now, 10 years after, there is not this situation is untrue. They appear in the international arena and other actors, other powers, as China, as India, a lot of people. And the world changes dramatically, and the strategical change of the world is very, very impressive in this moment, for different reasons. Because as you know very well, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, more than 3,000 million people embrace free economy. This transformed the economy in the world. Strategically, this country that is continued to be the most important country in the world, most powerful country in the world, looking Asia, not looking exactly Europe. Why? Because Europe is not already a problem. Was a problem before the Second World War. Was a problem after with the Soviets. Was a problem after the fall of the Soviets. But now there is not exactly a problem. And the question for us, and for your question, is we are not a problem, but we are part of the solution. This is our role in the world. In 2003, some people trying that and decided, this is the moment to put my finger in the eye of the United States and to put in difficulties the Atlantic Alliance. I don't share this idea, because I believe in the values that forged the current Atlantic Alliance. And the values that forged the Atlantic Alliance are the values based in liberty, freedom, and democracy, real law, and equality between among men and women. This is a spent prosperity, a spent freedom, a spent democracy during everywhere. And I defend these values. But the lack of commitment in Europe about the international responsibilities in terms of security is very complicated, no? Because the temptation of appeasement always appears in the political scenario. And you can imagine Iran, for instance. If Iran becomes a nuclear power, there are at least two clear consequences. The first one, the balanced power in the Middle East and even in most parts of the world changing dramatically. Secondly, will be inevitable a very serious rise of proliferation and nuclear weapons. If Iran became a nuclear power, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, and other countries with this, follow the same way? And why are other countries outside the region, in America? You can look, for example, in Venezuela or in Brazil or in other parts. And manage a world with 8, 6, 8, 7 nuclear powers are complicated. But manage a world with 20, 25 nuclear power are almost impossible. And the risk that the sum of these nuclear devices fall in the hands of the terrorist group is increasing. This is a very serious concern for all international community. I hope that the more strong responsibility for Europeans in the international security. But one time it's impossible for the United States to continue to maintain same positions alone without a more strong commitment for his traditional allies. I hope so.
So, in regards to the reforms that you helped institute in Spain in the late 1990s, so in hindsight, given the issue in Spain right now of a stagnant labor market and its current ongoing recession, in hindsight, do you think, could you have done more of those reforms then? Or were they pretty much what you could realistically accomplish, say, in the late 90s to early 2000s, since from articles in Economist, they were praising Spain during those years for its economic performance, and now it's being cast as one of the laggards in the European Union. So could they have gone any further than that, and would that have been able to prevent some of the current crises?
Sincerely, let me say you that I believe that I was a good prime minister, no? because finally, politics is facts. Obviously, it's ideas, but especially it's facts. When I take office in 1986, I received a country with 24% of unemployment. 8 years ago was only 10. 7% of deficit, surplus. 70% of indebtedness, 28. 12 million people working, 18 million people working. This is our life. This is expression of prosperity. 64% of more GDP in Spain during 8 years. This is the effort of the Spanish society that transform We are capable to create more employees, more jobs that Italy, England, United Kingdom, Germany, and France together. And now we create more employees that England, Italy, France, and Germany together. This is another world. This is another world. This is one of the reasons because I believe a lot in the power of ideas and the power of the right decisions. And I express some candidly that good ideas usually produce good results, and bad ideas usually produce bad results. Good policies produce good results, and the facts are the facts. And now we can look in some consequences of very, very serious mistakes in the European economy and the Spanish economy. I explained before the reform of the Economic and Growth Pact. In 2003, there exists this pact. This pact is the pillar of the euro. And then in one moment, Germans and France, the most powerful economies in Europe, don't respect the pact. and both decided change the rules of the pact. But it's not serious. This is impossible to maintain seriously this position. If the two most important countries make this, the rest of the countries in the periphery can thinking, oh, free holidays for the future, and take a very responsible decision in fiscal terms, obviously. Well, euro is a single currency that promotes stability, but the euro have rules, and you have respect the rules. Obviously, that exists an economic crisis, but you have to respect the rules. There is two hands. In one hand, you have renounce the monetary sovereignty for your country. This means that in times of crisis, you can use the tool of devaluate currency to gain competitiveness. Okay, can use. You lose this possibility. The question is, how is possible for me gain competitiveness without devaluate currency? And this is the other hand. To organize an extremely flexible and competitive country. But if you lose this, and you not organize this, the result is a very serious disaster. And in some European countries, the consequence of organize not, for example, a flexible labor market, organize a rigid labor market. No practice a policy of the less taxes, the more taxes, more costs in the economy. What is the problem? You have now lack of growth, lack of perspective of growth, and lack of competitiveness. And you condemn the countries several years, at best, several years with a flat economy. If for some countries you can take, how is possible to absorb this? You can, the crisis, make a lot of reforms, recover discipline, recover stability, make a flexible country at once. Let me say, it's very difficult. Take, for example, for instance, a very important country, France in Europe. This is one important expression of changes, difficulty of changes in this moment. This is one of the reasons because current crisis will produce political and social serious consequences, not only in economic terms, and will produce losers and winners, and produce a new unbalanced political power order in Europe. But the age of retirement in France was 60 years old, okay? 60 years old. And the problem in France has been huge strikes, huge problems, because the current president decided move from 60 to 62. To 62. We can say, no, he had moved to 80s, or 70s, or 78. No, but you can imagine some people that don't beginning to working with 30 years old, 32 years old. And when arrived to 58, can say, or 60, can say, oh, this is finished. We're living holidays. And then, no, 60, 62. Listen, it's terrible. But looking, for example, my country, but how is possible that with 5 million people unemployed, with 40% of people under 25 years old without a job, we cannot organize and define a new labor reform that to promote opportunities. How is it possible not to explain to people that it's unsustainable, this situation? And this is one of the things that I try to explain. Welfare state in all the European countries are unsustainable in the future. And we needed very, very, very serious reform. But if you consider that you have an indefinite right to living doing nothing, it's more complicated that you invite the people, the working responsibility of discipline, of to do something every day in life. No? This is the different views and the different consequences.
Prime Minister Aznar, thank you very much for your speech. Like you rightly said, the European Union is going through a budgetary coordination. However, it risks political aspirations, breaking it apart in the long run. How do you
I'm going to speak more loud, please.
Sorry. Like you said, the European Commission Union is going through budgetary coordination to get out of the current situation. And you said it risks political aspirations, breaking it apart in the long run. Do you see the role of the IMF or any other political institution coming in to actually stabilize the budgetary coordination in the long run?
I believe that one of the political consequences in Europe of this crisis will be a division in the countries of the north and the south. And as you can understand perfectly, I don't like this consequence. Second, the second consequence will be less power for the European institutions and more power in a nationalist approach in the great countries and great powers in Europe. I don't like exactly neither this consequence. But the third consequence is that will be very, very complicated to some European countries to avoid more problems in terms of sovereignty debt crisis in the future. And why? Because I don't share exactly the decisions taken for the European leaders in this moment. No? What at the beginning of this crisis in the sovereign debt in Europe was Greece. But Greece is a wonderful country, marvelous country. We live in, among other things, thanks to Greek heritage, but a lot of years ago. Now Greece is a very small economy, very small economy. But if you decide, well, in the Eurozone, we cannot admit bankruptcy, we cannot admit default, and you organize a fund to save this economy, and the creditors for this economy don't pay nothing in case that the Greece restructuring its debt. Well, this is a mistake, sorry. This is a mistake because you send a message of irresponsibility. Then comes Ireland. And you can explain me why German taxpayers or Spanish taxpayers or French taxpayers must to pay the problems on the Irish banks? Why? And then people talking about Portugal, another wonderful country, but a small economy. And then people talking about Spain or Italy. This is the problem. Because the fund that you have created, the network that you have created to solve this situation, don't working to resolve this problem. Don't working to resolve this problem. And then you confront with the United States with the policy of quantitative easing that I can tell here in this business school that I don't understand very well. Because I don't understand very well how it's possible to improve in deficit with more deficit. And I don't understand very well how it's possible to eliminate debt with more debt. I don't understand very well. But the decision of European Central Bank beginning to go in the same direction. The organize massive purchases, massive buys of the public debt in some countries as Ireland, Portugal, or Spain. But if you don't take very, very, very serious measures in the moment, was the possibility to have more problems in terms of sovereign debt crisis in Europe will be increasingly in the next weeks and in the next months. Unfortunately, but I think it's a more probable situation. One more.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the question would be, in a democracy, it is up to people to decide during the voting whom to elect as a leader of the country. And it's up to the leader of the country to deliver the message, that would people buy. And what we see recently here in the United States and in Europe is that the leadership kind of fails to address probably the concerns of the constituents because, Republicans won the election. In France, we have kind of trouble that you mentioned already to increase, by these 2 years. So I'm wondering whether it's the problem of the leadership or it's the problem of the communication or it's the problem of the people who just do not want to do anything. So what would be your solution to a better, stronger West? How West can, as democracy, as the freedom kind of example, persist and go forward in this situation? Thanks.
Thank you. Anytime that we have a political problem and that this political problem expresses a lack of leadership or lack of clarity, we're talking about communication problems. And this is not true. This is untrue. We have a communication problem, but it is not exactly the result of the current situation in the world. I consider that, I believe that the world living a fascinating new strategic changes. And you can adapt the position of each country of these changes. And this produces in this moment confusion. And there is a very important moment we can use for some populist politician that sell the idea that it's possible to resolve all the problems almost magically. I don't share this view. I don't share this view. The reality is more problematic. But you can adapt the position of the United States and this new international scenario. And it is normal that some part of the American people ask publicly, what happened? What is the destiny of the country? We are beginning the declination of the American power or no? Well, will be different. For us, for Europeans, the question is how it's possible to be more to become more influential in the world. Because if you look in these changes, you look in China, China is far for European. If Europe like to be converted in the periphery of the new world, I don't like this position. And you look in some countries in the periphery, I don't like this position. I prefer to be in the center of the decisions. Always. Always in my life. In all my policies. I don't like that another people decide for me. I like this is possible, decide for my country. No to living outside the table and blame others that take good and right decisions for me. No, I prefer to be in the center. But to explain this, to explain the people, the complexity of this world, explain the people, for instance, in European countries, or even here in the United States, excuse me, to maintain welfare states as we know it is impossible. And it's unsustainable. To maintain pension system in Europe without reforms, it is impossible. It is impossible to defend that the right to retirement fixed in 60 or in 58 with a perspective of life of 19 years or 92. It is totally absurd. And we needed moral clarity in the current leadership in the world. We needed people that explain. We needed leaders that explain the people how is the situation, how it's possible to do the situation. It is better to explain this than to attend that WikiLeaks make some things that under the table. No. It's necessary this very strong leadership because people in times of confusion needed very key points of reference, very key values to make trust, to make confidence, and to forge our life to be confident in the future. No? And we must to encourage the current leaders to take this responsibility or this view. Then we can act with success or no. But no is unacceptable. Avoid the problems. You must do the responsibility today. Look the problems, speak clearly to people, and trying to resolve the problems. This is exactly the role of the leadership. Thank you. Thank you very much.